It was some time ago, I remember hearing that we as a human race had entered the age of information. And I don't know about you, I don't hear anything official, but I feel as though we've moved from the age of information to the age of misinformation. We live in a world where information that is true and information that is false is spreading quickly, spreading wildly, and it's difficult often to determine, is this true or not? Is somebody just accidentally sharing something they believe is true, repeating something they've heard is true, but it's not? Or is somebody starting a false rumor, a false narrative, a false truth to try to get everybody else to believe something for their own reasons? We have plenty of examples we could talk about just in these last few months as we talk about information and misinformation, whether it's about COVID and the COVID numbers or vaccines or elections and political actions and so many other things that we could talk about and discuss, and we could start to bump heads against and say, I heard this and I heard this, and the information doesn't match up because there's a lot of misinformation in our world today. So the question is, are we concerned with truth, or are we content with the rumors? Are we content with opinions? Are we okay with just saying, well, I hear this and I hear that, and taking somebody's word for it and going, well, good enough for me? How do we know truth? Because tomorrow it's not going to be about the vaccines, it's not going to be about the elections, but it's going to be about information and misinformation about things like, well, some of the same things like politicians and money and health, but other things like death and God and truth itself. How do we know truth? How do we know what's good, what's right, and what's true? I'm going to give us a term that we probably have not heard, but we understand it and we've seen it in life a lot of times. The philosophical term here is ethical egoism. And you might not have heard the term, but you know what it looks like. It's one of those schools of thought that says that the end justifies the means. And so you can do something questionable as long as the result is good. And so right action is understood entirely in terms of the end result. Now, what's interesting here, more specifically with ethical egoism, is that good is defined as happiness. And so the more happy equals good. So if I'm happy and the result is my happiness, then it's a good thing that happened, because in the end, it was okay, it all worked out, we're all good. But if the end result is problems or sadness or heartache, then we say what happened was bad because it led to me being sad. And so more happy is more good, more sad is more bad, and we live in a culture that we begin to see might not understand this term, but lives it out on a very regular basis. As people say to live your truth, speak your truth, or they talk about my truth. What they're basically saying without understanding it is that if it makes you happy, that means it's good, and therefore it's the right thing to do. But if it makes you sad, or if someone else makes you sad by doing it, that means it's wrong, and therefore the wrong thing to do. You see, we live in a world where a lot of people believe that the end justifies the means, and they furthermore believe that my happiness is the happiness that matters most. We're going to look at some nuances of this in future weeks, but we live in a world where many of us have also believed that, well, the end result is what determines if it's right or wrong, and the end result that matters most is right here. If it makes me happy, if it makes me content, if it works out for me, then it was the right thing to do, and if it doesn't, it was the wrong thing to do. And there's a lot of people that believe this, and it's not very hard to see why, because when you were a kid and someone stole your toy or hit you or said something mean to you, you said to yourself, this doesn't feel very good. It doesn't feel right. I don't think this is okay. And it was true. It wasn't right. It wasn't good. It wasn't okay. And then we grew up and we got mistreated again, and we thought, I don't feel good. This isn't right. I don't think it's okay that this person did this to me. And again, we might have been right. But the problem is when we begin to think if it doesn't feel right, it isn't right, or if it doesn't make me happy, it must be wrong, and we start to apply it to other areas of life, because what it does is it reduces morality to an emotional response. How I feel about something becomes whether that thing is right or wrong, and I don't need to give you examples. For you to start to think through the culture we live in, start to think about interactions that maybe you've had with friends, or maybe things that you've said in the past based on events that have happened in your life that have gone well or badly, and how you have felt about them or how others have felt about them. What we've done is we've reduced truth, right, wrong, to how I feel. And it really doesn't work in any areas of life of significance that we actually discuss truth about. Because our emotions, our opinions, they don't change truth. They don't make something right or wrong. But we have so many in our world who now say to just live your truth. You know, do what's right for you. Don't let anyone tell you how to live your life. Why? Because how you feel is right. And no one can tell you how to feel. And your feelings are the ones that decide if something is right or wrong. If it feels good, it's good. If it feels wrong, it's wrong. And so we see why so many in our world today place a premium upon their feelings, because the feelings have become the arbiters of truth that say if it feels right, it's good and right. If it feels wrong, it's wrong. Unfortunately, our emotions, our opinions do not change reality. I've got a map here. It's supposed to snow. And on my map, it says we're getting 2 to 3 feet. I like this map, and it's my map. It's from 2015, but it's mine, my truth, and it's going to snow 3 feet tonight, right? It doesn't really work that way, was it? This is a more updated, more recent map that maybe you're going to believe a little bit more from 4 o'clock yesterday, and it's already changing, and who knows if that's going to be accurate or not. But here's the thing. Even the Weather Service, when they put out their forecast, they don't decide how much it snows, do they? We know that. In fact, the Weather Service is notorious for getting things wrong all the time, and yet we still believe them and go, yep, they know, and they're wrong probably more often than not. But we still go and we still listen. We go, okay, we're going to get 6 to 8 inches. And if it snows 2, we go, all right, well, they tried. What they predict, based on all the models, all the science involved, all the every factor that they can, does not change what actually happens. They can say it with great conviction. They can tell us on the news and say, wow, Long Island, you're going to get walloped. Be ready, get those snow blowers, get that. It's going to be cold. You're going to get like a foot of snow. But if you get 2 inches, their thoughts, their words, their beliefs have not changed reality. It doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter what we feel about gravity. It doesn't change reality. The earth does not become flat if enough of us start believing that the earth is flat. I want to take a quick poll here for you. I know nobody loves to do these, but is it right or wrong? Just a couple quick questions. Is it right or wrong to kill someone? Hopefully that's not that complicated. Is it right or wrong to kill somebody? Okay, a few of us are participating. That's pretty great. What if killing that person saves 200 other people? Is it right to kill that person, or is it wrong because there's 200 other people's lives at stake that will die if that person is not killed? It starts to get hard. Is it right because you saved 200, or is it wrong because you're killing someone? What if that person who has to die to save those other 200 is you? Is it right for that person to die for 200 others, or is it wrong? And these are the moral dilemmas we battle with today in our world as people go, how do I decide? And a lot of people say, well, it feels right, or the end justifies the means. So if one person has to die to save 2, 3, 4, then it's worth it. Because it's all based on how it feels. But when we change the equation around and you become that person, then the answer changes drastically. You can look at many of these studies they do in ethics and morality, and we see we as a culture, we as a people struggle with knowing what is right and knowing what is wrong when we reduce morality to our emotions and how we feel about whether that action is good or that action is wrong. See, truth is truth regardless of the consequences. Truth is constant and it does not get changed depending on our perspectives, opinions, or emotions. We could take some surveys in here today and we could talk about some controversial things. We could talk about, all right, should we wear masks? 1 mask, 2 masks, no masks. We could talk about COVID. We could talk about the vaccine. We could talk about elections. We could talk about a lot of topics in which we'll be a bit divided. But the truth does not change no matter how many of us in this room think one thing or another on any particular topic. The masks work or they don't. We can argue about that. We can look at this study or that study. We can argue about are the vaccine's dangerous or it's not, but our arguments really don't change it. We're just trying to understand the facts of reality. And some of us are picking these bits of information, and some are picking these bits of information, and we're coming together and saying, here's what I think is true, and others are coming and saying, here's what I think is true. But the reality is truth is not changed by our opinions. Truth is constant. What we are trying to do and what we are trying to determine is to discover truth itself and what is true on various topics and subjects. So at the beginning of this month, I got on a plane and I believed it could fly, and so it did. Okay, it flew, but it's not because I believed it could fly. That plane flew because some mechanics had put together the right parts and the right pieces and put that plane together in such a way that when the pilot flew the plane, it worked. My belief really had no bearing on it. Now, that's what made me get on the plane, but that didn't decide whether the plane was going to fly or not. It's not as though the plane crashes if not enough people are on the plane like Santa Claus saying, I think it can fly, I think it can fly. The plane will fly or it will not based on that airplane itself and the conditions around it. Our opinions do not change that truth. Truth is not subjective, it is objective. And so we can prove a lot of things in our world, especially to our younger kids as we're going through life, and maybe today it snows and my kids are like, man, snow's really different. I can prove to them that snow is really just water. And we take some snow and we melt it and go, oh, it's water. Who knew? And there's some things you can prove like that. You can prove 2 and 2, what those are going to equal. And I'll let you figure that one out later if you don't know. But there are things that do not change, no matter what we think about them. Some things we can prove and show and demonstrate. And then there's some things in life that are just hard. Some things in life that really are just complicated, where we try to understand what is the truth, and it's just so hard to understand that some people have stepped back and said, just do what feels good for you. What feels right to you. If it makes you happy, then that's your truth, because this topic is really hard. I don't think we're ever going to figure out the right answer here, so let's just go with your answer. You go with your truth, I'll go with mine. What makes me happy is what I'm going to do, and what makes you happy is what you're going to do, and we're just going to go live life based on the end that is me. And if I'm happy, it's good for me. And if you're happy, it's good for you. And we live in a world where a lot of people have said, we just can't figure out truth on these things, so you figure it out for yourself. And we've forgotten that our opinions don't actually change truth. See, truth exists whether or not I know it. There are a lot of things I do not understand, and I'm sure that's not a surprise. Things about brain surgery, about rocket science, about nanotechnology, all these things work whether I understand them or not. There are facts about if I don't understand them, they continue to function, and those facts are not changed. See, truth is not determined or created by knowledge. Truth is unaffected by thought. It is unaffected by emotion. It is unaffected by opinions or popularity. Truth exists whether we understand that truth or not. So what we must do is discover, not determine or invent truth. So the question we have is, how do we discover truth? Because there's a lot of topics out there, a lot of subjects that are difficult, that are contentious, that are divisive, that we say, I don't like the answers I hear. I hear other alternatives, and so I'm just going to go with what everybody else says. I'm going to do what feels right to me. But we know it doesn't work in real life. We know it doesn't work in most areas of life. How do we discover truth? If we want to know the truth about math, we pull out a calculator or a math book or take a math class. If we want to know the truth about cars, we go look it up, watch some YouTube videos, go talk to a mechanic, have somebody show you the truth about how this part works or functions. If we want to know the truth about weather, well, you can listen to the Weather Channel or app and they'll guess for you. And you can have some idea of what's going to happen tonight with the snow or on Monday. And we need to go to the source if we're going to discover or learn what truth is, because we can't decide it or create it ourselves. But on the questions of truth about life, death, purpose, origins, endings, the universe, and how we are to live and treat one another and all that's been created, where do we go? We go to the one who created all things and has told us what is true and what is right that we cannot discover on our own. We cannot change through our emotions or our opinions or our perspectives. So rather than simply voting on what we hope is true, what we believe is true, or what we wish would be true, or what we would feel good about if it was true, we need to go to the source of truth itself on these complicated matters that many people are simply content to say, if it feels good for you, if it feels right to you, you just live your truth. Because what matters most to so many in our world today is that I feel good, and that makes it right. We've got 4 kids at home, and if you've raised kids, you know kids ask questions. As soon as they can start to talk, they start to say, why, and then they start to say, how, and they say, Dad, how's this? Why is that made? Why does this work? How's that made how it is? Dad, explain to me about this, and the questions come, and I start to answer more and more, and now my kids have started to ask Google. Because they know Dad doesn't know everything, and it's true. I don't know everything. Google doesn't know everything either, and so we need to go to the source of truth, as 1 John chapter 3, verse 20 says. For God is greater than our hearts, and He knows everything. There are truths that we do not know, that we cannot vote on, that our emotions or opinions or our logic will not discover for us on our own, and so we go to God because the Bible declares to us that He knows everything. Now, some of the truths that God declares in His words, we're not going to be able to prove in this lifetime. We might never recognize that what God has said in His word is true until we stand before Him one day and go, this is what happens after death. I thought that, I read that, but I couldn't prove it until I'm here, and now I know it is true. And so in His mercy, God has declared, because He knows everything, the truth about life, about death, about our soul, about sin, about salvation, about eternity, about things that you and me, we can't prove. On our own, we can't go in a corner and say, all right, let's add this up. All right, we figured it out, God. Here's what's going on in this world. All we can do is see that there's a God who knows everything and who has shared with us some of those things that we will not know on our own, and we simply have to trust Him just like we trust the scientists, the doctors, or the cartographers who tell us things in their specialized fields that we're not going to know on our own. I've never been to Australia, but I still think Australia exists. Not because I can prove it because I've been there, but because other people have said things and shown things and proven things, and I go, okay, I believe it. I think that's true. And the God who knows all things has declared to us truth that we would not know on our own. The Bible goes on to say elsewhere in Numbers chapter 23, verse 19, it says, God is not a man that He should lie, nor a son of man that He should change His mind. Does He speak and then not act? Does He promise and not fulfill? You see, the God who knows all things not only knows all things, but He's not going to tell you the wrong thing. He's not going to say, all right, I know the truth, but how about you believe this story? God knows all things and does not lie. In fact, Hebrews 6:18 goes on to say it is impossible for God to lie. God does not lie and does not get tricked into repeating a lie like I sometimes do and you sometimes do. As we hear something that sounds good, that sounds convincing, we go, wow, sounds right to me. And we might share that, whether it's on Facebook or an email or whether we share it in a conversation from somebody we trusted because it sounded good, it sounded right, but it wasn't. And we didn't know. God knows all things, and it's impossible for Him to lie, and he will not get tricked into repeating or declaring something that is not true. In James, we read, chapter 1, verse 16, he says, "Don't be deceived, my dear brothers." Why? Because we're prone to being deceived. We can get tricked. We can believe things that aren't true. And so he says, don't be deceived. And he goes on in verse 17 to say, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. So don't be deceived into thinking something that is true that's not, because there is a God who knows all things, a God who knows all truth, a God who does not lie and does not repeat lies, who has not changed, and is a God who does what is good and right. So don't be deceived by what sounds good, what sounds right, instead of what is good and what is right. You see, God has declared what is true. Do we care that God has said what is true, or do we settle for our perspectives, our opinions, or what our emotions say is true? Proverbs chapter 30, verse 5, it says that every word of God proves true. This is from the English Standard Version. It says, do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you and you be found a liar. In other words, there are things that God has said which we cannot prove, but one day will be proven, will be demonstrated, and will be known of as truth. Truth has not changed. It is still applicable. It is still practical. It is still relevant. It is still God who knows all things, who does not lie, who has declared to us what is good, what is true, and what is right, and is preserved in his word. Many of us listen to various news sources, and it's interesting sometimes to hear someone as you have a conversation on a certain topic and you begin to hear, I think they've been listening to this person or this source or this. And you start to hear that they're repeating what they've heard, that they've begun to believe what they've been listening to for a long time. And we're not immune to it. All of us are susceptible to repeating and believing what we hear if we hear and begin to believe it long enough. I found this study interesting. It's from the book Leadership Team Coaching by Peter Hawkins. He says this, he says, when people trust an organization, they are twice as likely to believe positive messages about it than to believe negative messages. When they don't trust an organization, they're almost 4 times as likely to believe negatives as they are to buy in the positive messages. Think about our election cycle. What he's saying here is these studies demonstrate that if you trust someone or a group and you hear something negative, I don't really believe that. But if you hear something positive, you're way more likely to believe it. So you trust this person. You're negative, you hear positive, both things are reported, maybe they're both true. What do you believe? You're twice as likely to believe that thing that you already think. And then you've got that other person or that other group or that other company or party or whoever that you don't like, that you don't agree with, and you hear 2 different sets of information, one that's true and one that's positive, one that's negative. You're 4 times as likely to believe the negative. What's that tell us? That tells us we believe information that we already believe is true. Because we are going to believe the positive about something we already think positively about, and we're going to believe the negative about something we already believe negatively about, and the information might be there, and it might both be true, but what we believe is so often determined by what we already believe and what we already think. Who are we listening to? Who are we believing? Who are we trusting for truth? Are we believing the one who has spoken truth, who cannot lie, who will be proven true in the end, or do we believe what just sounds good to us and what we hope is right and what most of us think? In the age of misinformation, I want to challenge you to trust God, not yourself. I love this quote by St. Augustine of Hippo. He says, if you believe in the gospel what you like, and reject what you don't like, it's not the gospel you believe, but yourself. And so we can talk about a God who knows all things, who has declared truth, and yet even as Christians, sometimes we start to flip through the pages of our Bible and we go, okay, that sounds good. I don't know about that. That doesn't sound right at all. I don't think that's for us today. There's some great reasons why nope. And we start to pick through and we start to apply what we think is good, and we pick out what we believe is good, and we set aside what we don't think is good or don't think is right, and in the end what we're doing is we're just believing and trusting ourselves, just like everybody else. If you believe in the gospel what you like and reject what you don't like, it's not the gospel you believe, but yourself. We need to be grounded not in ourselves, but in truth. In the truth of God. As Jesus himself declared, there are choices in life. And he gave the example of a person who builds their house, builds their life, builds themselves on something firm like a solid rock. It's Jesus Christ himself and the truth of God's word about him. And he compared that to someone else who built a house, built their life, built their understanding, opinions, and perspectives on something that was shifting and changing like sand and opinions and popularity in our world. And Jesus says, you have a choice too. You can build your life on something firm, something lasting, something true, or you can build your life on something that changes, like the opinions and perspectives of people who build their life on what sounds good, what sounds right, what sounds true, but in the end it comes crashing down. If you want your life to be built on something that lasts, something that's stable, it needs to be based on truth. Not our opinions, not our perspectives, not how we feel about truth. Do we believe God, or do we believe us? Because we are one of billions of people in this world with billions of opinions and billions of perspectives, but there's only one God and one source of truth, and we are not him. So today, as we talk about truth, as we consider how some of the philosophies in our world permeate our own lives, our own hearts, our own communities, what do we do with this? First of all, I hope it's clear that we need to go to the Bible for truth. If God is the one who knows all things, does not lie, does not change, and does what is good, he has given to us in his grace what we need for life. We're going to dig into this a little bit more by way of topic next week, but I want to encourage you to listen to the source and authority of truth. Boy, two audience involvement opportunities today. How many people think that this $1 bill is a genuine dollar bill, or at least a picture of a genuine dollar bill? How's it look? Does it look good to you? Sounds good? All right, how many people think this $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe is the real deal? All right, we've got a few people. I think a few of us are looking at it going, 100 trillion. 100,000, 100,000, million, 10, 100 million, billion, 10 million, 100 million, trillion, 10, $100 trillion bill? Are you serious? And yet, if you know the history of Zimbabwe, maybe you heard it in the news in 2008, these are genuine forms of currency from the country of Zimbabwe that they printed when they had some ridiculous amounts of inflation going on before their system of money collapsed. We recognize forgeries to the extent that we recognize what is authentic. And so some of you in here, you've seen or heard about this before, and you see this picture and you go, yep, that's true. And some of you see this and you go, 100 trillion, yeah, right. There's no way that's true, because you have not been acquainted with that yet. And so it's new to you. So you don't recognize it. You see it and you go, I don't know. Doesn't look good. And all you can do is trust your gut feeling on this to say, that's a big number. No way. But if you're acquainted with And if you recognize the truth because you know it and understand it and have discovered what it actually says, you can recognize it and go, yes, that actually happened. Yes, that's actually real. That's actually true. The same thing is true of life. To see through the lies, we need to be familiar with truth because we cannot recognize counterfeits unless we recognize what is authentic, what is true, and what God has actually declared. And so we need to trust what God says, not what we think or what we feel. I think is never a replacement for the Bible says. And so the ultimate question is, do I trust what God has said about things that are true that I cannot prove myself? Things that I do with the rest of life, things that I do when the weather service starts to say it's going to snow, I can't prove that. It's cold. I look outside and say, it's cold, kids. But that's about as much as I can do for the kids. I can't tell them when it's going to snow until I turn on the TV or pull up the app and go, hey, I think it's going to snow tonight. It looks like some other people who know things that I don't are telling me something, and I choose to believe that that's true. We've been told what God has said is true in His Word. It's up to us to discover and understand what He has said is true, not what we think or feel is true. I want to challenge us as we close here. Be humble. As we talk about truth, we recognize that God is the source of truth, not you, not me, not anyone else. God is the one who is infallible, unchanging, who does not do wrong. I am and you are fallible. God is objective and we are not. We are influenced and biased by our opinions and perspectives and by the things that we already think are true or right. And so we need to be gracious, humble people with those who think or believe differently than we do, because the source of truth is here, not here. And so sometimes I get into an argument with somebody, or maybe we have a disagreement because what I think is true and what you think is true and different, and we're going to fight about what both of us think are true. But what we need to do is recognize this is what's true. Oh, I never saw that before. Yeah, you're right. That does change things a little bit. Here's what we have learned that God has said is true. Because I am not the source of truth. We discover truth. We don't decide truth. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14. We looked at this last week. He talks about truth. He talks about different parts of the body of Christ working together, and how being built on this truth and working together based on this truth, he says, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth and back and forth by the waves and blown here and there and here by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men and the deceitful scheming. You see, this is what we have going on in our world, isn't it? We have this person says this, that person says this. Well, that sounds good. Whoa, this person makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go with what they said is going on in our world. This person presents a convincing argument. We start to hear over here. We go, I think they're right. And we run from thing to thing, and the only thing we can do is trust what feels right, what feels good. And we are tossed around between opinion and perspective by other people, by the deceitfulness of others who, for their own selfish gains, tell us what we want to believe. Ephesians 4:15 goes on to say, instead of being immature, tossed around by what we just think or feel is true, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head, that is Christ. There is truth in this world that does not change. Our opinions do not impact it. We can be tossed around by the perspectives and opinions of everyone else, or we can know truth. And we can be built on truth and use truth in love. And as we are based on truth in a loving way towards those around us, we can grow as Christians who know what God has said, what God has declared, and how we are to interact and live in this world. And we can go to His word for truth, trust what He has said, not what we think, and humbly interact with others and say, I'm not the source of truth. I didn't invent this. I didn't decide this. But here's what God says. We live in a world where many people are chasing emotions, believing that what they feel or what they think determines whether an action is right or wrong. But our emotions and our opinions do not change truth. So I challenge us today to trust God, not yourself, for truth in this age of misinformation. Join me in prayer.